And thank you, Ellen, for explaining it very well.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And now it's our pleasure to welcome Bea Brickell. Now, Bea has tried to be our guest once or twice before. There was a hurricane, and you know, it's a lousy excuse, but she was locked in up there in the Carolinas with a hurricane. So finally, here she is today. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Bea Brickell.
Welcome, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
All right, well, that's good. I'm sorry I missed the earlier November date, but even though I don't live in Florida, there's enough Florida in me that when I hear the word hurricane, I don't go anywhere. I have to batten down the hatches, get out the oil lamps. My neighbors are like, what's going on? I said, hurricane. Anyway, I want to thank Robert for his patience in inviting me here. Emily, thank you too. And let me just start in by saying that you may be wondering how much I could know about the Brickells, because by the time I came along, most of them had already passed away. Well, I still had my wonderful grandmother who was married to Charles Brickell. And as a child, I was one of these kids that you probably didn't want to have as a relative. Questions. Could I learn to fly? Could I climb to the top of the tree? What did the Brickells eat for breakfast in the morning when they were so far away from everybody and all they had were alligators? So over the time that I had to talk with her, I asked some questions, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a feeling of how the Brickell boys lived at that time. How did the Brickels actually get on? I have more information about the three boys because my grandmother, of course, was married to Charles. Also, I had some other just things I learned from some of my Kellum relatives, because my grandmother was a Kellum and we always mixed up with them. And I have two stories at the end that I heard from two of the Kellum boys. And I know they're true because they're so fantastic. Nobody could have invented them. So anyway, to start, the Brickell boys, of course, and my grandmother also left some notes, which I was able to take a look at. There were three Brickell boys. There was William, there was Charles, and there was George. And their first duty, as my grandmother wrote, was to be good students. So of course they had school. And I don't know, but I believe they probably had school at the house because I'm not sure there was any other school. And they had their homework. Okay, that seems like a big job. In addition, they had what they called household chores. The boys had to work in the big vegetable and fruit garden. That meant getting up there, hoeing those weeds, planting sometimes, harvesting food. And they worked under the direction of a gentleman that was from the Bahamas. And although I can't remember exactly what his name was, I think it was Strawn or Straw. And my grandmother had such respect for this man. She said that he knew everything about plants, about citrus trees, about alligator pear trees. And she said that he had a rule that if you were planting something in the garden, you had to do it by the light of the full moon. So I asked myself, would Mary Brickell and William Brickell have told their boys, just go ahead and sleep through? I don't think so. I think they were included in that. And I thought about the reason for it, and I thought, well, maybe in the tropics where it's so hot and you have that sun coming up, you want to give those little seedlings at least 6 hours of cool so that they have a chance to at least adjust that much. He was quite a successful gardener. So, all right, so in addition to the boys' schoolwork, you now have them working in the garden. You have them harvesting, maybe working at night on special nights. There was another job that they had related to the garden, and that was whatever food was not going to be used by the Brickells, they had to bring to market and sell. And all money that they got from that would go into the support of the Brickell family. In addition, they learned to be good fishermen. They did not do any hunting as far as I know, but they knew how to sail and they knew how to fish. And same thing, if the food was not going to be used by the family, then it had to be sold. So as you can see, they kept quite busy, and I don't know that I could have really kept up with that schedule, but presumably they did. So just going on from there,
What year is this?
this would have been early well, starting in the late 1880s, back in that time. And there was at that time really not any people there where had grocery stores. I mean, it wasn't like you could just go to the store and buy something. Everyone had to live out of their garden, and you had to get what you wanted. And that was kind of, I think, the way it was. It was a hard life, but it was a good life, I think. So let's turn back just a little bit. I said, well, Granny, I want to know what did they eat at the house? She said, well, there was a big kitchen at the William and Mary Brickell house, and there was a dining room adjacent to the kitchen where the Brickell family ate. And and they probably had a guest or two, someone coming by, anybody coming by would get some food. So there were probably 10 people eating at the main dining room. And my grandmother said she always liked to eat on the ground floor because it was cooler. So I asked her, I said, well, who ate down there? And she said, well, the people that worked at Brickell. So think about it. There were probably like maybe 10 people having dinner upstairs, make it breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And probably of the people that worked there, I would think there would have been at least 10 people that probably ate there on a regular basis, right? So you're talking 20 meals 3 times a day, 60 meals. And that's a lot of food, and it's a lot of preparation. And I began to see that why the garden was important and why Mary perhaps wanted to try to make it as self-sufficient an operation as possible. So now I want to just fast forward because now it's in the late 1950s. And I'm at my grandmother's house in Maryland, and there's a beautiful mahogany table, dining table. And I didn't know it was mahogany, but it was dark, shiny wood. And we had the 2 leaves of the table put together. And beneath each leaf was something that looked like a tree. It was this huge sort of round thing. And at the bottom, it turned into 3 feet, like a claw foot. And I would like to go under there, and I really thought it was kind of a jungle hideout, and my grandmother allowed it. So, and then we had another piece that sat as a sideboard, but at the holiday season, that piece would come out and would go in the middle and would make an even bigger table. I mean, I don't know whether 12 or 15 people could sit there, but I would think so. So of course I wanted to know, where did this table come from? And she said, well, this was the table that sat in the downstairs where the people that worked for Brickell had their meals. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized how much they must have thought of her. My grandmother thought of Mary as a wonderful person, but this table did not have a scar on it. I mean, they must have taken meticulous care to keep that beautiful mahogany table looking the way it did. And I thought, that was kind of a very nice tribute to my great-grandmother. And my last question to my granny on the subject was really, what did they eat down there? Because I had the idea that when you didn't, I don't know, that if you weren't a member of the family, maybe you didn't get everything. My grandmother said the same. So every person who was a part of that Brickell working parties, or maybe even coming from the trading post, they enjoyed the same fine food that they had up at the Brickell main table. Also, if any of you have ever looked at old cookbooks like the Fanny Farmer cookbook, which was written in 1898, you'll see that in the days before we had penicillin and such things, food was thought of as something that would ward off disease. You had to eat fresh, good food. And there were special chapters in there dedicated to people who were ill or who were recovering. And I think that probably also played a role in the food preparation and serving, because I think people thought that if you ate well and you had good food, you could either throw off these things or maybe you wouldn't get them at all. So all in all, that was kind of the aspects of the dining and what the boys did at that time. So beyond that, I wanted to just talk briefly about how the boys learned to sail. And I don't know where we are on these slides. Are you pushing ahead on them or what? Well, there,
Yeah, we have.
well, keep going. Well, we just covered the table, so let's move on. That's just a picture of the Brickell house. Go on. More, that's in the Miami River. Go ahead. All right, the next subject I want to talk about is laundry. Now, you probably wonder how some little kid who should not ask so many questions wanted to know what kind of washing machines did they have back there? Well, that's actually my father, and the lady is a lovely Bahamian lady there. I don't know who she is, but a dog, and this is my Kellum cousin who must have been invited over. In those days, everything was white towels, white sheets, white shirts, white dress shirts, ladies' blouses. So my grandmother said, no, there weren't any washing machines, dear. She said, but they had Bahamian ladies who would do the laundry. What? How did they do that? She said, well, they had big copper, or I'm not sure whether they were copper or iron pots that were set up in the yard, and the men would bring the wood, and they would have these pots filled with water. And when they got to the boiling stage, they would add the soap. What soap? She didn't know. She said the white things would be put in there and stirred around with a big paddle, stirred around and stirred around until they looked clean, and they were clean. All right, Granny, what do they have? Where were their clotheslines? No, they didn't have clotheslines. She said they lay all the things out on the white tablecloths, the white everything out on the green lawn, out on the lawn. I said, Granny, didn't they get grass stains? No, she said, everything was snowy white. So I don't know how they did it, but it seems kind of like a miracle there. So let's move ahead on the slides. I think there's a picture coming up of learning to sail. All right, this is actually my father, because I don't have any pictures, but I'm sure it's quite similar. That's my father on his boat Streak. And with him is Charlie Luho, a gentleman who was a Bahamian sailor. And this is later. My father's about 19 there, and he's just captured that enormous fish, which I don't know what it is, but to make a long story short, as a young man, and I'm sure it was the same with, I believe it would have been the same for William, Charles, and George. My father had a book on tying nautical lines and knots, and he had that from about age 5. So he spent a lot of time learning all this. And finally he got a boat. There it is. And he wanted to learn to sail. And he was told, well, if you want to learn to sail, we have to get a Bahamian to teach you because they know the water. So my father told me that on the day of the big first lesson, which he had prepped for, he tied and retied all the lines. He did the nautical knots as they were needed. The boat was just perfectly clean. And he said, Charlie just came along the dock and he just hopped on the boat. He didn't say too much. He immediately started untying all the lines and retying them properly. So my father didn't say too much, you know, he said he just kind of waited, and then he pulled out a big red bandana out of his back pocket. My father's like, what? He said, I'm going to tie this around your head. He said, can you see anything? He said, no. He said, good, because now you're going to sail the boat. Yes, you learn to sail by feeling the wind against the side of your face, by feeling the waves as they hit the boat, and by kind of developing a sixth sense of sailing that I think you probably have to have if you really need to get out there and sail to get food for your family and to be a competent sailor. So I tried this once. No. I couldn't do it, but I do know that even to this day, I can usually tell the wind direction by just feeling it, whether it hits the side of my face, and I'm trying to understand how much force it had. And then looking around at the sky and the clouds, and I see in Miami, no matter how beautiful, it could be raining at any minute. And just kind of watching the ocean and the water and seeing how it could go. And my father said Charlie Luho knew more than all of that. He seemed to know all about what went in the water, how the currents ran, what the bottom looked like, what the weather would be. He said his father, Charles Brickell, had a little boat called the Bluebird. And Charles Brickell and my grandmother would sail that little boat out to the Gulf Stream whenever they wanted to. And my grandmother was no sailor. I mean, she was always perfectly dressed in sort of a Victorian outfit. Now, I know she didn't really do anything but go for the ride, but it was very, very nice to know that the Brickells back then knew quite a bit about the water and how to not only enjoy themselves there, but to make it kind of a part of their lives that was pleasant and that which they were competent with. So that's kind of that. I just want to say at this point, I'm going to switch on to tell you two little stories about the Kellums that were my cousins, but I wanted to say that all these things that happened so long ago, and like you, all of you, we stand on the shoulders of those that came before us. We learn from them, but for them, we wouldn't be here. And I wanted to dedicate this talk to all the people that sat at that Brickell table and had their meals down there for those many years. Their names are lost, but their respect for the Brickell family by keeping that table so beautiful tells me that there was a lot of good love and feeling there between all of them. So that's my final thought on that. I wrote all this out like a good lawyer, but I wrote it out a while ago, and then I thought, well, I'll shorten it up, and then I thought, nah, just keep going. But if you get bored, just raise your hand and I'll move on. My grandmother, as I said, was a Kellum, and her uncle, who was born late in life to her parents, was only 7 years older than my grandmother. So of course they were like brother and sister. And he always called her Bones because she was little and she only weighed about 100 pounds. Anyway, he had quite a big family of boys and girls. And the two youngest boys were Bertram and Jimmy. And Med Kellum, like a lot of families back then, also had a property down in the Keys. And it was I think we have a picture of it, if you can get it up there. Oh, well, that's where we're getting there. Next one, there it is. I'm going to say it doesn't look like it would land, it would stay through a hurricane, but I understand from what I heard that those pillars going down into the ground were actually anchored into the coral rock. So there was not too much was going to move that thing. And it was on Plantation Key. And I don't know, some of you may know where that is. I think it's about halfway down. They had about 20 acres. And from a note that I saw Med Kellum wrote, they had about 10 acres and basically citrus trees of different types. And they had kind of a couple of alligator pear trees and a few little scraggly vegetables. And he and the boys used to like to go down there on the weekend or anytime they could. His youngest boy, Bert, was about 5. And I think Jimmy at that point would have been 11. So on this particular day, I want to say one more thing. It's not shown in this picture, but in front of the Plantation Key home was a kind of cut that ran from the Atlantic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. So if you wanted to get your dinner, all you had to do was walk out there when the tide was coming in and catch a fish. But as time went on, it seemed like there were less and less fish in this cut. And this really annoyed Matt. And this particular weekend, there were no fish. And he said, boys, he said, someone is stealing our fish. We're going to have to do something about this. We said, tonight, Jimmy, you get a lantern. He said, I've got a trident, kind of I don't know what it was, a spear or what. You know what a trident is. It's three forks. He said, whatever it is, he says, we're gonna get it out of there and get our fish back. So little Bert, who's 5 years old, says, I wanna go, Daddy, I wanna go. He says, you're too young to go. So he made such a fuss that they had to take him. So they had like a little punt dinghy out there. And they put Bert in the front, and his dad told him, now look, you hold on to this bow line, no matter what. I want you to sit here because it's really important. Because he was thinking, as long as he sits there and holds that bow line or painter, nothing can happen to him. And then he said, Jimmy, you come back here with me. He said, and I want you to hold that lantern up high. I want to see what's going on in our cut. So out they go. And you know, there's always kind of phosphorescence out there, and you could see this and that. But towards the far end of the cut, it looked like there was something over there. I'm not quite sure what it was, but they decided to head over in that direction. And Med said, Jimmy, hold that lantern up higher. So he got up on the little seat of the boat there, and he said, he began to see that this was rather a large alligator is what he thought. So he thought, well, you know, we'll just go on over there. It's probably one that's half dead. It's too old to actually get any fish. It just sits here eating my fish. So as they began to get closer to it, and I heard this story from Bert, by the way, he said that it didn't seem to have the telltale reflection that you normally see with alligators, which is kind of like a yellow reflection in their eyes. That's what they told me. I've never done this. But he said as the closer they got, not only was it big, but the eyes were kind of having like a pink red color. And all of a sudden it just hit him that, hey, this is a saltwater croc, not an alligator. Those things are big and they're dangerous. But what to do? You know, this thing is there, they're in this punt boat, and the tide is pushing them towards this direction. And he's really not equipped to do too much about it, but he thought, well, I'll just get by it and we'll turn the punt to the shore and we'll just worry about all this later. But at that point, it seemed like the croc was moving towards them. And now Matt is thinking, you know, what have I done? I've got to save my boys. He said, I'll just have to deal with this. He said, boys, he said, I want you to be ready in case we need to swim to shore. So they put the lantern down, and he had this little trident spear. And when they got close to this croc, he got the idea that he could catch it right behind the back at the neck area and maybe scare it enough to get it to go away so they'd have a chance to get to shore. But he didn't really hit that part. He hit the head. Didn't have any effect on the croc, except that it took its tail and it was like, and they were thrown into the water. The three of them are now in the water. Oh my gosh. So Ned is screaming, you know, boys, where are you? Where are you? And Jimmy says, I'm going to shore, Dad. He said, yeah, but where's Bert? Where's Bert? And he says, and even better, where's the skiff? So he looks back, you know, he doesn't have the lantern, and he's swimming, trying to see where Bert is. And he realizes all of a sudden, unbelievably, as the punt had flipped back over, the croc was in the punt. And you could see its big scaly tail hanging off of one side of it. He said it was enough to cause you to have a heart attack. But even more amazing, Bert's in the water. He still got a hold of the line. And the two of them are sailing out towards the Atlantic Ocean. And he said, another amazing feature was that the croc seemed to be enjoying himself. So he said, Bert, we got to get out of here. You got to go to shore with me. And he said, no, Dad, I'm doing what you told me, holding on to that line. He said, no, we don't need the line. We don't need the boat, nothing. So they got back. Of course, they made it to shore. Luckily, they got up the next morning. Ned ran down to see what everything looked like. There was no sign of the punt boat or the croc. So the boys were so excited because they would have such a story to tell their friends back home. But Ned never said anything about it because I guess he thought it was just something he shouldn't have done to start with. But the boys told everybody about it, but see, nobody believed it. But he told me that story and I know it's true. So that's just one thing that can happen when you live back in the old days. I've only got one other story if you're still with me here, or even if you're not.
Yes.
So now it's like maybe 10 years later and little Bert's, I don't know quite, maybe a little bit more than 10 years, maybe 12, 13 years. Bert and Jimmy have gotten jobs and they're working for the state Florida highway, and they're still living in Plantation Key. And their job was kind of to keep the road open. And this really didn't require much work on their part because the road is either open or it's closed. But if it's a big hurricane, they couldn't do anything about it. And if it's something local, before they would hear about it, usually somebody in the neighborhood would fix the road, like if there's a pothole or whatever. So they were doing pretty good up there in the Keys. And the only thing is every Friday they had to go down to Key West to pick up their paychecks. And they made a little holiday of it while they were down there. They had a couple of these 50-gallon barrels, and they would always bring them back full of gas, courtesy of the state of Florida. And then they would have lunch at Sloppy Joe's, and I think we've got a picture of that there somewhere. Well, we'll get to it. Keep going. You can leave that for a minute. All right, that's good too. So anyway, Bert and Jimmy are in there having lunch like they always did. And along come these gangsters. It's like Bert said, there were usually 3, sometimes 4 of them. And they've got these gorgeous girls with them. They come in, they order a big lunch, and they're on their way up to Miami for the weekend. And they're living the big life. And Jimmy said to Bert, he said, I don't like this. He said, they're not doing any work and they're making a ton of money. What about us? And Bert said, well, we don't do much work either. He said, yeah, well, he said, well, I think we should make some money off of these gangsters. And Bert's like, yeah, but how are we going to do that? He says, we're going to challenge them to a race. We're going to race from Key West to Miami in the car. Bert says, we don't got a car. He said, well, over on the side street there's an old Phaeton. Does anybody know what a Phaeton is? It was kind of a very powerful vehicle and had, it wasn't a convertible, but it had a canvas top. The windows didn't roll down, but it had 2 side wings, one on the passenger side and one on the driver's side, and a huge back seat, kind of U-shaped with plush carpeting or plush velour. And that had been the gangster's car, but they had abandoned it over there at the side street. And Jimmy said, Bert, we're gonna go get that car. And under the guise of, doing some good work for the state, they would just haul this car out of there and take it up to their place. And Bert was like, yeah, I don't know. He said, that red, it looks awful faded, looks like pink. He said, the canvas top is all ripped. He said, Jimmy said, don't worry about it. He said, so they took it up there. Meanwhile, the gangsters came around, and the next weekend they invited him, let's have a race. So he said, well, they set the date for like 3 weeks from there. And in that time, Bert and Jimmy just ripped the whole car engine apart because they could do that. And they had that thing working perfectly. Then they decided to paint it a kind of a green color because they thought if they made it red, the gangsters might recognize it as their car, right? And then they took all the upholstery, and I don't know what they did with that, but they kind of fixed that up, put new tires on it. The thing is running great. So Jimmy said, at that time, if you wanted to drive from Key West to Miami, you had to stop for gas one way or another. You just didn't have enough gas to get all the way up there. And there were only 2 places to stop. One was in Tavernier, and I think the other one was on Plantation Key. And these were both, like filling stations, and then there was like a little store there, whatever, you could get bait, whatever. So Jimmy said, now look, he said, when we have this race, he says, we're going to let them start out ahead of us. And he said, Bert, you'll be the driver and I'll be the tactician. And Bert's like, are you sure we're going to get this $500? And he said, yeah, we're going to get it. All right. So I said, so anyway, the gangsters piled in their car and the showgirls with them, and they had a driver, and they were drinking and smoking cigars, and they take off. So then Bert and Jimmy are behind them in their car, actually the gangsters' car redone, and they're following them. And then the gangsters stopped at the first station in Tavernier, and when they're filling up with gas, Bert and Jimmy passed them. So of course they think that they're going to have to stop at Plantation Key. I hope I have that geography right, but when they get up there, of course, Bert's noticing that the gas gauge is like going down to 0. And he says, Jimmy, we're going to pull in here, right? And Jimmy's like, no, we're not going to pull in here. Keep going. So like miraculously, the gas gauge starts to go up And suddenly there's like 3/4 of a tank of gas in there. And Bert's like, this is a miracle, you know, is this real? So they go and they get as far as Card Sound. And by that time, that gauge is going down again. So Jimmy says, Bert, you went up to see your girlfriend last weekend. He said, while you were away, I got 2 50-gallon barrels. And he said, I put one on each side under those big seats. And it's got 50 gallons of gas in each one of them. He said, we're not stopping. So Bert's like, oh. He says, so just there's a little toggle switch down on the driver's side. Just hit that switch and turn it over. And sure enough, the gas starts pouring in. They just ripped it all the way up to the Miami Roadhouse. They're having their steak dinner before the gangsters show up. Oh, they couldn't believe it. They thought they must have gotten bad gas. So they paid the $500. See, that was a lot of money back then. You could go to New York City and have a Delmonico steak dinner with all the trimmings for like $4. But the gangsters wanted a rematch for the next Friday. So Bert's like, I don't know. He said, you know, how are we going to win another race? He says, we're still going to win it. He said, I don't know. We'll figure out a way to do it. So same thing goes all over again. They start out, but this time they let the gangsters go ahead. And they figure the gangsters are going to stop at, not at Tavernier, but at Plantation, because they think the gas was bad at the other station. So he said, let them stop and then let them get ahead and then we'll get ahead. And then he said, we'll do the same thing all over again. And sure enough, when they got to Card Sound, they just passed the gangsters and their girlfriends. And again, they get to the Roadhouse first. And they're eating their steak. So the gangster had to pay him another $500. So they said next time they're going to have their mechanic go over that car from A to Z because they couldn't understand it. So after they took off, Bert said, Jimmy, I don't think we can't keep doing this. He said, they're going to figure it out. He said, oh, we're not going to keep doing it. He said, we're going to tell them we got transferred. I said, well, where are we going to get transferred to? We said, Miami. We don't need this money from the stupid state. We got a ton of money here. So late at night, they took one of those state road kind of trailers that they had access to. They covered over the car, and they took it up in the Everglades and dumped it in a deep hole. And they told the gangsters, you know, tell the gangsters, hey, we've been transferred to Tallahassee. So I said, Bert, I said, did it work? He said, yeah, it worked. He said, but we couldn't go back down there for a real long time. And I said, where's the car? He said, I know where it is, Bea. He said, but I'll never tell you. And that's kind of it. I don't have any more right now, so I appreciate you being here. And there were a lot of good times in the old days.
How about some questions and answers?
Oh my gosh. Where's, get up here, Cesar. He's the one with all the dates. What?
You took the whereabouts of this car to the grave.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of abandoned cars in the Everglades, so there must be quite a bit of racing going.
Yeah.
Maybe so, but I guess they didn't make $1,000 on it.
Would you talk about the picture?
What picture?
Right next to you.
I don't know anything about it.
How about if I tell them about the pictures since they're mine?
Well, let's,
May I do that, Rob? Ladies and gentlemen, these came from the Brickell family, Carmen Petsulas. Some of you remember that name of that wonderful lady. When she died, she didn't pay the storage for 3 years. And eventually all of the Brickell family stuff, Billy Brickell, any relationship? Young Billy?
well, if you mean,
Not the original Mr. Brickell, that's the original Mr. Brickell, the original Mrs. Brickell. A letter from Mrs. Brickell to William Gleason. And we have all of the Brickell memorabilia.
is that more over there, I suppose?
That is, please take a look, her name is under the picture.
Can you read it?
Mary Brickell, born 1836, 1922.
I don't know. I haven't seen either one of those before. Where is Cesar?
Well, we'll take some more questions and we'll tell about your next project. I think there's a slide about your next. There you go.
Where was the Brickell home here in Miami?
Yes.
Well, it was really at the mouth of the Miami River on the south side, right there on that point, and then behind it was the Brickell Trading Post. And my grandmother's home, she was married to Charles Brickell, was an attractive land immediately adjacent to that. So there was nothing there, you know, when they built that home there, and that was like the first house, I think, that was built there. And it was quite well built. It lasted a long time, but it's gone now.
What's on the property now?
Hotel, high rise.
Were the Brickles here before Julia settled?
Yes, yes, very much so. Where's Cesar? When did they come over here? I know that Alice Brickell was born in 1855.
57 in Australia.
Well, 57 in New South Wales, Australia, and she was 5 when they came here.
1871, they got the money.
So shortly thereafter, they started building that house. Okay, anybody else? Yeah,
What was the reason they came
well,
from Australia to here?
that's a good question, and Cesar, want me to answer it?
Sure, absolutely.
I think that, well, first of all, Mary Brickell was born in England, and she came to Australia when she was 3 years old. And William Brickell was born in Steubenville, Ohio. And he was raised by his 2 maiden aunts because his parents had died. And my grandmother told me that when he was 18, he scraped enough money together to buy a horse. And it took him 5 months to get to the California gold fields. But he did, and he did a little panning for gold, and then he realized you could make more money buying gold from the miners. So he did that for a while, and then he heard about the Australian gold rush. He decided to go to Australia, and that's where he met Mary Brickell. And while they were there, they did quite a bit of good work in a little town called Albury, building the first bridge that went across the Murray River. That was the first time that Sydney and Melbourne could be linked by road, because before that, the river was so swift that they could never keep a bridge up. And I think he built a hotel there. He had a business with stage coaches. He also had the ferry going across the river till the bridge was there. But I think maybe he had bigger dreams. He wanted to do something more, and maybe he wanted to come back to America, because remember, he was originally from Ohio. So they made up their mind to come, and they came to Florida. And I like to think that that they had a vision of something there, a city at the end of the river and right on the bay, that would be something that they could create and build from really nothing, rather than just letting it go piece by piece. You know, if you've ever seen some of these towns or cities that started along like the Amazon River and the jungle, they're like just piecemeal, everything's torn up, shacks here, you know, whatever. They had the idea, I think, to do something bigger and better than that. And they not only had the idea, but they had a plan to do it. And that they would use the money that William Brickell had made, and they would buy land. And as Cesar has said so many times, the land was always in Mary Brickell's name. She managed it. She managed the sale of the land. She managed the new pieces of property they would buy. She was very concerned that people of color would have an opportunity to buy land where they wanted to. If the bank wouldn't lend to them, she would give them microloans. So there was a lot of that going on, but I still think they had a vision. And I think they wanted maybe to create something on their own from nothing to something.
Did they have anything to do with Julia Tuttle coming down to Miami? I think it was also Ohio, wasn't she?
I know you haven't mentioned it, but I think my father told me once that, yes, they did have something to do with it, because they had known each other in Cleveland, and that, come on down, you know, that sort of thing.
Well, actually, Julia Tuttle's father, Ephraim Sturdivant, and William Brickell partnered together to come down. They were friends in Cleveland, Ohio first. And some people joked that, quote, the old fools were seeking the fountain of youth, because they thought it was so silly to go to miles of South Florida.
It's true, yeah, no, it's true. Yeah.
That could be, you know,
On the same boat, yeah, same boat, same.
I'm not, you know, I don't, I'm just telling you basically the things I know. I never really asked my grandmother about Julia Tuttle or why they didn't Cleveland or, because I was really only interested in what was going on down there that I, as a child, was seeing and had questions about. But I know you've researched it. You agree?
What's the ship behind you? Tell us about the new project.
All right, well, our new project started about a year and a half ago. I had heard all my life that my grandmother's uncle, Medford Ross Kellum, and I think I mentioned with the croc situation, had taken a ship to the South Seas, and it was the Camelot. And there it is. It was 230 feet length overall, LOA. It was about, how on deck was what, 140 or 130?
130 tall.
But, well, the masts were 130 feet tall from the deck. It was originally a lumber schooner called the Luzon out of the Philippines. And he had made up his mind to take a cruise to the South Seas. And about a year and a half ago, I was at my cousin's house out in Utah. And they said, did you see what we left you by the side of the bed? And I'm like, what? It was a big plastic bag. And I opened it up. It was the log of the Camelot, that handwritten log that stayed, you know, from the second voyage of 1925. And I mean, I was just stunned. So I talked to Cesar about it. And I said, you know, there's a story there. I mean, again, you have a person who is from a Miami pioneer family. He gets the idea, I want to go to the South Seas and explore it. And I'm going to maybe stop in Hawaii at the Bishop Museum and pick up some scientists. I'm going to have special new diesel engines put in. I'm going to have it retrofitted with ice making equipment, all kinds of new radio signaling stuff. And it's going to be a voyage of discovery because remember, back then, people they never heard of Tahiti. I don't believe that was a name that was very common. I think the South Seas kind of covered it. So away they went. And meanwhile, Cesar has visited. He's been to Hawaii. He's been already out to the South Seas to see Tahiti and all of that. And we're going to put together a story about this, the story, because I think it's a great story. You know, you have someone who has a big dream, another dream, to go on the voyage of discovery, which my relatives down in the South Pacific said that really where they went, most of the places they went to were just completely as they had always been. You know, we have a lot of pictures of the natives couldn't believe that you could make water solid, ice. Just thousands of islands to visit, you know, a lot of animals and plants to take samples of and discover. And my cousins, several of the Kellum kids were on a trip, including my wonderful cousin Ida that I loved and adored. And I heard about it since childhood, but I didn't until I got that log. I didn't think there could ever be a story, but now there is. So there you see it. And there's Medford Kellum at the helm. And he always wore white. I don't know why that was, maybe because the Bahamian laundresses could keep it white, but the way they went. And we have any more pictures up there? And he took most of his family with him.
That's the last, that's 14 or 14.
Yeah, that's it. By the way, Ellen is going to read you some questions from the online community.
Oh my goodness,
Ellen, go for it.
this is a quiz.
Oh, no? Okay.
So far, no.
Okay. Check it. Any other questions for Ms. Oh, I got one.
Did you go back to earlier in the slide and show a picture of the house?
One second.
Car.
Oh, that's a car.
Let me know if you want to stop on any.
Gangsters. No, go back.
A little further.
That's it.
No, my house.
in Miami.
Oh, the Miami house. Okay, we'll go back. Way back. That's it. Stop. It had 23 rooms. So I remember they had a big family. They had like 7 kids, and you had people working there. And you had the people that worked on the property, and you had people coming in from the trading post that worked there. So they had quite a group, you know, you needed that space, I think.
So when did they arrive in Miami? The Brickell family? And when did they
1871
leave?
initially.
So the 1870s.
The land was not theirs until 1874 outright. Took them about 4 years to clear all deed issues from the Harriet English issues of the property. So they took control of about 2,000 acres in 1871. By the time the railroad gets in there, in command of 6,000 acres. So 2,000 in Fort Lauderdale and a whole host of, including a few north of the river. Most times they're associated south, but they have a few properties.
What happened to the Brickell family? They, of course, have Brickell.
They died.
Longer story.
They died
There are
out.
some, there's some Brickels, there's still some Brickels today.
None of the girls married. That was one thing right there. And I don't know why that was. Alice was older. Of course, she was born in New South Wales. And I wanted you to, I'm glad you mentioned this because Alice is with us today. How is that? Around my neck is a little ring. When my grandmother was quite a bit younger, she had just learned her husband had just passed away in 1924. Unexpectedly, she had a 9-year-old son, my father. Alice asked to see her. And, you know, in those days, you didn't just come over to somebody's house. So anyway, my grandmother said, all right, I'll come on over. She said, I guess Alice must have had a premonition because she also died in 1924. But she said, I want you to give this ring. There actually are 2 rings, but I don't know where the other one is. But I have this one. And I want you to give this to your son's daughter. And my grandmother said, but my son is only 9 years old. She said, I know that, but I want you to promise me. So when I turned 18, my grandmother gave me this. So I don't usually wear it, but I thought it would be nice to wear it today. It's a long time ago, but as I said, we stand on the shoulders of those that came before us, and but for them, we wouldn't be here. So it's good to remember them and think of them and write down what you know. Huh? I'm done.
So Bea will be in the back of the library of this meeting room, and she can talk to you from there if you have any questions for her, along with Cesar, who's an amazing historian. I think we have a lot of historians in this room. Becky, Madoff. And
Can I make one more comment?
sure.
The 1878 Revenue Collectors Book, which is the oldest piece of marked Dade County memorabilia known to exist, has the Sturtevants in it, and that's Julia Tuttle's parents, and the Brickells. Julia didn't come till 1888. She is one of 4 mothers of Miami. She died in 1898. Why is Mary Brickell not considered one of the 4 mothers of Miami? Think about it.
Rob, do you have any last words? Rob? Especially for next month. Amazing baseball, Miami connection.
Well, once again, let's thank Bea for being with us. It's so lovely. And I know she's running around like crazy this weekend, and so thank you for having us on the schedule right from the start. We really do appreciate it. So one more time, let's thank her for being here. And Caesar, thanks for all your help and arrangements and stuff. And Caesar uncharacteristically has some books for sale.